Hello, and welcome to this second Blender tutorial, where today we're going to take a look at the different modes available inside of Blender. So to get started, go ahead and open up Blender, and we're just taking a look at the default scene, which just has that cube in it. Now, no 3D modeling software would be complete without the ability to, of course, edit these objects. So first, let's just talk about the basic properties of an object. If you have an object selected, it's going to be outlined in an orange color. It'll also be highlighted here in the scene collection. If you take a look down here, you can find more information in the inspector, which is going to provide information such as the transform data, which is going to hold the position, rotation, and scale. And of course, you could directly modify these, and you'll notice that your object is going to move respectively when you do that. Let me Control Z 3 times to undo those changes. You can also press N on the keyboard. N is just going to open up a quick menu for the transform. And one thing that I would like to point out is the scale difference between Blender and Unity. In Unity, of course, you can add a primitive cube to the scene, and it's going to have a scale of 1 by 1 by 1. If you were to take the same cube, like for example this cube here inside Blender, export it and bring it into Unity, it would be twice the size of the standard Unity cube. The reason why is because in Blender the standard size is 2 by 2 by 2 meters. The meters convert nicely between each other, it's double the size inside of Blender. And when you press N to open up this side menu, one of the first things that I like to do, especially if I'm developing my assets for a Unity game, is to rescale this down to 1 by 1 by 1, just like that. And then also, what I would like to do is, let me go ahead and close that, is if you press Control A after you make these modifications, so again Control A on the keyboard, we've made the modifications but we want to apply it to the object, and we're just going to go ahead and select all transforms. So what that essentially does is we modified the dimensions of it. So you can see here we have the scale is now 0.5, 0.5, 0.5, which is half a 1 because the size was 2 to start out with. We're essentially just resetting those values. When we did all transforms, we were setting the default values down to 1. Okay, so now that we have the size of our object, we know where to view the transform data, how do we actually manipulate this? Well, we can use the manipulation tools here. If we have, for example, the move tool selected, as well as the object selected, we can drag any of these axes and the object will move respectively. And you can imagine we can rotate on any of these axes. Now, one important thing to note is the pivot in which we are making these modifications around. So let me Control Z this a few times just to get it back to where it was. Now, if you take a look here in the center of the object, there are two things happening. One of them is the target hair looking icon, which is this with the red and white circle around it. That is your 3D cursor. The 3D cursor is going to specify it can be used to place, I should say, the pivot of an object. You can also snap objects to that position. It's just a really handy way to quickly transform your object. So for example, we can modify the 3D cursor by selecting it here, and then you can actually set the position just like this. Now if we were to set the 3D cursor to right down here, what are some things that we can do with it? Well, let's take a look here in the top center. We have a few things that we can manipulate, and particularly this one is the way in which we are working with the pivot of the object. Now the pivot is the little orange circle which is exactly in the center of that cube. It is going to show through the material of the object so that you can actually see it, but it is in the center of that object. If we go ahead and, for example, select 3D cursor, what are some things that we can do? Well, let's say we wanted to rotate. Now we can actually rotate around this point that we selected rather than the actual object pivot itself. We can also kind of do the median point. which again is just kind of where the pivot is respectively by default. There are a few other settings here, but probably the two that you'll be in the absolute most is that 3D cursor as well as the median point. Now if we take a look here at the transform, you'll notice that when I move the object like this, it's going to move directly up and down. It's not moving respective to how the actual object is oriented. If you want to change that, you can take a look at this global drop down here, and we want to select local in this case. That's going to allow me to move this based on the actual orientation of the cube. So you can take a look at the different settings here. You can do it based on your view, so if you rotate to a specific place, that's a very good one. But typically you'll just be using the global and local, and that'll work for most of your transform operations. Okay, there are a few other ones here that I'm not going to talk about too much. You can snap these two to a vertex, edge, or face. We'll cover those when we are getting a little bit more into our advanced modeling, but the two I just want you to take away here are you can set the pivot via the 3D cursor median point as well as the global and local. Okay, so what I'd like to do now is, let's say, I just did an operation there, not even thinking about it. Let's say you accidentally position your 3D cursor over here, and you were doing some transform operations based on it. You need to snap your 3D cursor back to the center of the object. Well, you can do that by doing Shift-S on your keyboard, and then you can say, okay, what do you want to do? You can either move your cursor to selected, your cursor to active, your cursor to the selection or to the grid. So typically what I will do is cursor to the active object, which will be this one right here. Cursor to active, let me find it again. There we go. And that'll snap that back into place. I don't use that too often, but I do want to make you aware of how to do that. Okay, let's actually get into transforming this around now. I'm actually going to go ahead and just reset all of this stuff back to 0, just so we have a fresh template to work on. Perfect. Alright, so right now we have been working inside of object mode. We can tell what mode we're in the upper left hand corner. Here is object mode. There are a total of 6 different modes, and we're going to cover most of them. Right now we're just going to focus on the difference between object and edit mode. So object mode allows you to interact with the object as a whole. Edit mode is going to allow you more specifically to interact with the components that comprise of the object. So you can either click this little tab here, or you can press Tab. Tab is going to automatically toggle you between object mode and edit mode. So go ahead and make sure to tab into edit mode, and then let's go ahead and start manipulating this. You'll notice that when you entered into edit mode, your screens are changing. That's because Blender is automatically going to set up your workspace to whatever mode you are currently working in. So in edit mode, if we take a look here, we still have those standard transforms, but we also have a bunch of additional ones here. But probably the most important thing is this right here, these 3 options. You have vertex, edge, and face. Let's go ahead and deselect everything by doing Alt-A. Alt-A will just automatically deselect everything that you have selected in your scene. And then if you have, for example, the face mode selected here, you can go ahead and select the various faces just by left-clicking on them. If you hold down Shift, you can select multiple faces at once, so I have those 3 selected there. And as you can imagine, Edge mode will allow you to select edges. Now you can, of course, apply operations to this. So what would happen, for example, if we were to go ahead and do a scale operation with this selected? You can see it's going to scale the edges kind of based on the ones that we had selected. Or we can select this one, move it a little bit, use the transform tools, move it out just a bit. And vertex mode, of course, we can select any vertice here and go ahead and work with it to get the shape that we're looking for. Now there are a few tricks and techniques that you can use when you're manipulating your geometry. Let me reset this back to our standard cube that we were working on. One of them that I like to work with is Control R. So go ahead and press Control R and then position your mouse over the object. This is going to introduce you to the edge loop. The edge loop is going to be a great way for you to quickly add geometry to a particular object. Like for example, you can see this yellow preview line is going to essentially cut the object all the way around. So if you were to click once, but don't click twice yet, clicking once is going to allow you to position it, and once you do that, that is where it's going to apply the cut. If we do Control R one more time, you'll notice also that we can scroll with the mouse wheel. If you scroll with the mouse wheel after pressing Control R, that's going to increase the number of cuts that is going to be applied to this object. So now you can see we have a bunch of more geometry here that we can start interacting with and doing some exciting stuff with, just like that. Perfect. Okay, so another way that you can add additional geometry too is through some subdivisions, and there are a few different ways to add subdivisions. One of the ways that you can do it is by adding a modifier to it. So for example, if we were to go ahead and click on this face, we can select the Add modifier, and one thing you can do here is the subdivision surface. So it's going to split the faces into smaller parts. Now this is going to apply to the object as a whole, and before you apply the operation, it's going to give you a preview of what that object is going to look like. So this is going to kind of collapse it into a unique shape here. I'm not really sure how to describe it, but it gives you a preview of what the cube was and what it is going to go to once you have applied that operation. Another way that you can subdivide your face is if you have a face selected, you can go up to this Edge menu and then select Subdivide. That's going to only apply a subdivide to whatever you have currently selected. So for example, we could select this one, then select this one, and then go ahead and subdivide that again to give you a little bit more geometry to work with. If you select on each of these menus, you can read through the different options that you have available to you. You can do some extrusion, and this is particularly for the edges, so it's going to kind of give you a hollow shape just like that. That's quite interesting. Over here on the left hand side, we have the extrude region, where we can go ahead and extrude this part out. So again, we clicked on this one, hold, and then select the extrude region. We can bring that out just like that. And then if we wanted to add a little bit more even, we could do I on the keyboard, I to inset, bring it in a little bit, and I'll get a little bit fancy. We'll do E on the keyboard, E to extrude, I to inset, and then E to extrude. And you can quickly see we're going to get some very interesting geometry going on. And as well as you can do some other operations, such as we could do E to extrude, and then S to scale. You can bring it in just like that, and then go ahead and continue use E to extrude and bring it out just like that. So one thing that I did want to highlight right there is I mentioned two different commands, and let me recover them. The first one was the inset is if you have a face selected, such as this face here, you can press I on the keyboard. What that's going to do is it's going to bring your geometry in from an equal amount from all sides. If we contrast that to, for example, doing E to extrude and S to scale, you'll notice that they're not going to be proportional on all sides. Like for example, if you take a look at the top versus the right, the top is going to be significantly thicker than the right side is. But if we do the I to inset, it's going to remain a constant thickness throughout. Alright. Now some other modes here, of course, I would encourage you to continue to take a look at these various things They are amazing in what they can do. And take a look at these options here, such as sliding your edges around, subdividing, and extruding. Those three operations, you can really create anything that your heart is going to and your mind is going to imagine. Let me also talk to you briefly about the ability to add additional objects. You can press Shift A on the keyboard, and that's going to bring up the Add menu. Now, I would like to make a distinction here. You are currently in edit mode, which means if you add shapes when you're in edit mode, it's going to become a part of this object's geometry. So for example, if we were to add a cube here, the cube is going to appear all the way up here, but you'll notice that the cube did not create a separate game object. This cube, although it's completely disconnected, it is a part of this object. For example, when we tab back into object mode or click back into object mode and we move this, that's going to move with it because it is part of that object. If you want to add game objects that are not part of that geometry, you'll want to make sure you're in object mode first. So come back out here in object mode or make sure that you are in object mode, and then you can do Shift A, and that's going to give you the ability to add a lot more stuff. There's only a limited amount of stuff that you can add in edit mode. But here we can go ahead and select a new shape, such as, let's do a UV sphere this time, and you'll notice that it is a separate object up there in the scene collection. Alright, I believe that's going to be it for this second tutorial. That was a lot of information. I would encourage you to take some time to practice going back and forth between object and edit mode. In edit mode, become comfortable manipulating the edges, vertices, and faces, as well as practice doing some operations such as extruding faces, transforming the geometry, and subdividing, as well as some new features such as take an edge and apply a bevel to it, and see all of the amazing things that you can create. In the next tutorial, we're going to take a look at creating a very basic character inside of Blender, and then finally we're going to take that character and rig it up. Alright, if you have any questions, please do not hesitate to reach or put them in the comment section below, and I'll be happy to get back to you, or reach out to your instructor for more help. Thank you very much.